there are many folks who genuinely just love being involved in pursuing many different things. At the same time, I have two concerns. One is I also have seen more than once people use that label as a way to hide from committing to one thing that they really want to be doing and not being able to be as adept at it as they hope and dream of being, and using that as an excuse to never step into a place where they actually see what they're capable of.
Katie, let it out with Katie. Let it out with Katie Dalebout, enthusiast and curator of people and ideas you need to hear. Hi, welcome back to Let It Out, hosted by me, Katie Dalebout. Today on the podcast, like every week, I talk to someone who is fascinating and inspiring and just a really interesting guy, Jonathan Fields, who you just heard from in the little intro quote. I picked that one out of this episode as one that really hit me hard. He was talking about being multi-passionate or feeling like a jack of all trades, master of none, which is something that I've been feeling like lately and have been kind of asking every podcast guest about. And his answer to this question in particular is one of the things from this episode that really stands out to me as something, like I said, hit me hard. It was very eye-opening to me and something that I've really taken with me from this episode that I am thinking about more and talking about. I'm telling everyone about this little insight I gleaned from this episode. So there's way more where that came from in this podcast episode. And I know that you will love Jonathan Fields as much as I do. For some of you who've been listening for a very long time, Jonathan is one of my first guests. He came on the first season of the show back in 2013, and his podcast, Good Life Project, was one of my inspirations for starting this podcast. He is such a great interviewer, and in this podcast, he's a great interviewee. He just had a book come out. I said that so much in a radio voice right there. He was a great interviewee. I don't know what happened to me right there, but I could re-record this, or I just think it's sort of funny, so I'm going to leave that in. Anyway, Jonathan is back on the podcast talking about all sorts of things, basically anything I was curious about. I actually got to meet him when I was in New York City the week my book came out, because I got to go on his podcast and record in the Good Life Project studio, which we kind of allude to a little bit in this episode. But if you follow me on Snapchat, you saw this all go down. I was basically super nervous and super awkward, and then I took a selfie with him on the street with it was really windy that day, so our hair is blowing in our face. And anyway, it was just a really funny interaction, and he's such a great guy and a nice person that I call a mentor and a friend. So I know you'll really love this episode. Just the regular announcements, I guess. So go ahead and leave a review on iTunes if you like this show, if it's valuable to you in any way. That is so helpful. And another thing, to help me be able to keep doing it and keep doing it at the level I'm doing it now and the up-leveling that I want to be doing, donating to the show is something that is available that you can do. The link to that, of course, is in the show notes. And another way, if you want to support the podcast financially without spending any extra money than you normally would, shop through my Amazon link. Just use that link to shop on Amazon like you normally would, and Amazon throws a couple pennies my way so I can keep doing the podcast. So that's really great. Thank you, Amazon. So you can check that out. Another way to support the show is sharing it with a friend. Just send it along to anyone you think it would be helpful for, anyone you think might find it interesting, and subscribing on your iTelephone or your Android telephone, whatever telephone you use, subscribing to the podcast. It's like giving the podcast a high five when you hit that purple button, because it actually helps more people find the show so I can keep doing it in the algorithm or however it works in iTunes. So that would be great. Those are all the things that you can do to help the show. Last week, I had on Josh Radner, and it was epic. It was something that I've always wanted to do, a conversation I've always wanted to have, and thank you to everyone who sent me feedback about that conversation. I obviously was nervous when I was recording it. I was obviously very excited. And so many of you sent me your feedback of, just because I know you, I knew you were a little bit nervous, but you did a great job. And so thank you so much for saying that. And I am so grateful that Josh came on the podcast. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, go back and listen to it. And yeah, it was just a really great week. I'm just updating you guys now. If you are on my email list, I wrote more about this so you can know more of the ins and outs of my life and what I'm thinking and feeling if you're on my VIP email list, which you should get on. It's really fun, and I love sending out those letters. And you can join the Facebook group as well. That's a great place if you want to meet other people who listen to the podcast. That's probably the best way to do that. Again, link to all of this is in the show notes. And, my friend Amanda and I were just shooting Pilates videos in my apartment because she's coming out with that course, or it's out now. The registration closes at the end of the month on the 31st, I think. So again, link to that's in the show notes. I love you guys and enjoy my conversation with Jonathan Fields. So welcome back, Jonathan. Thank you so much for coming back on the podcast and talking with me again. We were chatting a little bit before I pressed record about how the first time you came on the podcast was 2014, which we both can't believe that was already over 2 years ago.
I know.
Craziness.
It is craziness. Well, I'm excited to be back, and I hope I do your show justice.
Oh, yes, you totally will. And the last time I saw you was in person in New York City, right when my book came out.
Indeed.
And I got to stop by the Good Life Project studio and record a riff with you about my book, which I don't know if I told you then, but I was super nervous and starstruck to meet you, but you were so nice, even when I was like messing up my riff because it was surreal to be in the podcast studio of the podcast that inspired me to start a podcast. And so thank you so much again for having me and being so supportive and nice when my book came out and just being such a great mentor and friend.
Oh, yeah, it was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun, and you didn't seem nervous at all.
Oh, thank you. Well, apparently I faked it really well. Anyway, as you know, it takes a village to put a book out there. So thank you and congrats on your new book, which I'm so excited to chat about. I've got my copy that's all like highlighted and stuff right in front of me.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been and now you know, like very personally, it's always like a crazy adventure to try and get something from your head and then put it out into the world in the form of a book. And so when it actually looks like a book and feels like a book and you can turn the pages, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. And I know this is your second time putting a book out there, but I would love to know, let's start there. How are you feeling about this particular project, this book hitting the shelves and by the time this is airing, it's out now. So, what are your thoughts and feelings about this being in the hands of people? And, I'm very special and have this advanced copy. So a lot of people have already been reading it. What have you been feeling as the person who put this information out there and knowing how many people it's going to touch? That's a lot to hold. So how are you feeling and how are your buckets doing, which we'll get into what that means.
Yeah, I feel pretty good. It's been a really interesting book, and it's taken a lot of work and a lot of changes in the way that I write, and because it's not the type of book that I've written. This is actually the third book. So the first two they were about kind of like the human condition and people and living a good life, but fundamentally they're also built around careers and entrepreneurship and sort of like going deep into the creative process. And this is the first time that I've kind of almost let go of the shield of having to tie something in some way to like the quote legitimacy of business. In order to feel like, I was writing something that was valuable and just kind of step out and say, you know what, fundamentally underneath it all, what really interests me is just exploring human potential, is exploring like the human condition and how we can live in the world in a way that where we feel good about, what we're doing in the world, who we're doing it with, how we're contributing, and not having to go back and say, relate it to this anchor of business and entrepreneurship and careers, which is all valid and legit, but at the same time, it's a bit of a coming out book for me, and kind of positioning me as saying, hey, like what I've really been about underneath all of this is exploring human potential, and that's so it makes me a little bit anxious to kind of go out to that place. I feel like it's a little untethered, but at the same time, it feels really good to just kind of like step out. And the early response to the chapters and to the review copies has been pretty amazing. And now that it's in people's hands, it's I'm just really excited. I'm excited to have something that I hope people will not just read, but actually do. Whether you buy the book, whether you take it out from your library, I don't really care. Just I would love to know that in some way it's people have gone through it and then actually tried, taken action on it in some way, and then it's led to some sort of meaningful outcome in their lives. That's really sort of my greatest hope for it.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love the way that the book is broken down, and I really want to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But part of it is a guidebook. It goes through day by day, and which reminds me a bit of my book, since my book is also a guidebook of tools, and I can just speak to that a little bit, seeing people doing the actual tools and Instagramming that, and one of the tools requires them to, it's kind of like a scavenger hunt, and they have to, tweet something and, with the hashtag tool whatever from Let It Out. And it was so cool for me to see people actually doing that, which I'm sure that you are getting tons of that too. And it's like, oh my gosh, they're actually doing it. This thing that I made, people are actually having an experience with. And that's just like such a beautiful feeling to create something that can actually be used by people. And you totally did that with this book. It's so great, and I'm already loving it and going through it, and it is really personal too, especially the story you tell right in the introduction is so personal and so well written and just so creative, and I'm so excited for people to read that and really, mostly above that, really understand this 3-bucket approach, which is what you talk about a lot largely in this book, which is, the formula behind living a good life. And being someone who's followed your work for a long time, I've heard about this before, but it was so wonderful to the way it was presented in this book, and it's so organized so awesomely. And I would love if you could talk to us about a couple of things. I want to know how that idea for the bucket approach came to be, if you maybe remember when you thought of it. I would love to hear about that, and then I'd love to get into it a little bit and talk to people more about what those 3 buckets are, so people can start thinking about where they fall within that.
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad it resonates with you, because the idea was that really, because I question myself, and I think a lot of us question ourselves when we're trying to put our own work into the world. One of the big questions is always, because there's massive imposter syndrome, and you're kind of like, but who am I to write a book like this? I mean, come on, I wrote a book called How to Live a Good Life. Yeah. It's not like it's the first book out there that sort of explores the topic. So I really had to get okay with answering that in a way that I felt like was really adding value. So the place that I came to is that the vast majority of what we've needed to know, we've already known for a really long time, yet we still suffer. We still move through life feeling like we're not seen, we're not fully expressed, we can't figure out how to access our potential. We're living other people's lives. We're constantly behind. So the question for me was, well, if pretty much everything that we need to know has been out there for thousands of years, we're still pretty much struggling so much, then where's the real disconnect? It's not in information. And what I really realize is it's largely in the way that it's conveyed, that the way that the ideas are conveyed. And there's so much complexity and process layered into stuff. So what I wanted to do was just really simplify and really distill. And I thought about, my now 50 years on the planet, and my experience living and having some great successes and big failures, and and decades at this point in deep study and learning at the feet of so many incredible teachers. And could I distill this into something so simple that people would hear it once, remember it for life, and then be able to use it as a tool to guide their behavior every day from that moment forward? And that was my kind of objective. So I started, and I've played with so many different models and frameworks over the years. I'm somebody who sees patterns and how things go together. And so, at one point this was layers and layers and many buckets and all this. And I kept kind of saying to myself, not simple enough, not simple enough. How do I preserve the power, but make it simpler? And eventually I distilled it down to these 3 buckets. And the idea was I wanted something, just like I said, you hear it once, you remember it for life, and it guides your behavior. And it probably started coming together a couple of years. It's funny because the book that I actually sold my publisher is not the book that I ended up writing. And a lot of this model really took shape, and I actually had the time to really test it with a lot of people who've been through our programs and stuff like that to validate it, because I wanted to make sure it actually really worked. It worked in my life, it made sense, but I really wanted to make sure it was robust. And I ended up shifting gears in the middle and writing a different book, and I had to, but I had to go to the publisher and explain why I wanted to write a different book, and that ended up being this book. And when I kind of told them the new idea and about the buckets, they turned to me. They're like, "Why didn't you sell this book to us first? Because it makes perfect sense." And my answer was, because it wasn't final. It hadn't formed on the way that it needed to, and I hadn't been able to test it enough at that point. And I wanted to make sure that if it put something into the world, it was valid and it was, rigorous, and it would really make a difference. So that's kind of where it all emerged from. So, the ideas draw from every part of life, from just living in New York City to, like studying Eastern philosophy, to teaching yoga, to building companies and supporting people and training and speaking. So and trying to distill that all into a really simple model was the ultimate goal.
Well, high five over the internet. Good job. You totally did that, and I'm so excited for people to learn more about it. So let's give them like a little preview of it. I would love if you could talk about what is the 3-bucket approach, what are the 3 buckets, and there's some great questions in the book where people can kind of rate themselves and get really honest about where they are, which I loved. But I'd love if you could kind of go into it a little bit, so right now, before people even get the book, they can start thinking about where they fall within those buckets.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a really simple idea, and the idea is that your life is made up of 3 different buckets, and we call them vitality, connection, and contribution. And a good life is the process of filling those buckets and keeping them bubbling over. The fuller they are, the better your life becomes. The emptier they are, the worse your life becomes. If at any given point 1 runs dry, you're going to be in a world of hurt. If 2 run dry, you'll be in excruciating pain. If all 3 run dry, you will be figuratively and literally dead. So what are those 3 buckets? Vitality. When we think about vitality, there's all sorts of things that we can talk about if you want, that would go into it and that you could do to fill that bucket. But fundamentally, what we're talking about is optimizing your state of mind and your state of body. And always I talk about them as the same thing because you can't disconnect them anymore. The science is so crystal clear. The connection bucket is about your relationships. It's about what happens between you and other people, and between you and the environment, between you and your natural world, between you and any sense of God or source or anything bigger than you, and you and a community of like-minded people. It could also be you and pets, anything that's really meaningful to you. It's about the in-between. And the third one is your contribution bucket, and that's about how you're contributing your gifts to the world. It's about, a lot of people equate that to your work bucket. I don't necessarily go there, because what I've learned over the years, and sometimes I've experienced this in my own life, is the thing that I get paid for isn't always the thing that I consider my genuine contribution.
Yeah.
It's not the place where I generally light up and find the most meaning. Often it is, and like I'm in a window in a season of my life right now where it really is really well aligned. But it's not for everybody, and it doesn't have to be. And I think sometimes putting that construct on people actually does more damage than it does good.
Yeah, I love that. We were just talking about that a little bit before we started recording, about how that's such a valuable lesson that I've learned over the years, of not having to put the pressure on yourself to make your connection bucket necessarily be where you're making your money, or I'm sorry, your contribution bucket. But it can be, and in different seasons of your life, it can be. So that's so cool. And I love this approach so much. It's so simple, and the way that the book is broken up is so great. So there's this amazing introduction, and then you go into much more information about these buckets. But then my favorite part is the way that the book is broken down into a section for each of the 3 buckets, with different days broken up. It's kind of like a scavenger hunt for your life to really make it better and the best it can be. So what are some of your tips for how people can approach the book? Because I know you say in the book that people can go through it day by day in all of the different buckets, or if they're like, you know what, I've got vitality on lock, I'm just like feeling so great there, I want to skip right to connection, or because that's the bucket that seems most empty to me, or I want to skip to contribution. Do you think that that's a okay way to approach your book, and then maybe come back to a different bucket, or what do you think there?
Yeah, totally. And the book, I wrote the book so that you don't actually have to read it from front to back, in a linear fashion. You can jump around, you can cherry pick. Most of the chapters after the earlier chapters are really short and sweet, and they each fundamentally have like a story, a bit of science, and then something to do that'll really move the needle. And the idea is that you can do exactly what you said. You can either kind of say, but I'm pretty dialed in. I love my work. It's deeply meaningful. I feel lit up. I feel like I'm leveraging my strengths to their fullest, and it's deeply aligned with what I believe in the world. And but I feel like my state of my connection bucket just isn't really good. I feel like I haven't been giving good attention to the people around me, whether they're friends, families, like an intimate partner, to your colleagues. You feel disconnected. You don't feel a sense of belonging to community, or a bit isolated. And you may say, okay, you know what? I want to really focus a lot on doing a little something every single day to fill up my connection bucket. And so you can do that. So there's a whole section which is really just, okay, spend 10 days doing a deep dive there. Or you can, if you feel like, there's, I think everything is a little bit low right now, and I'm not entirely sure where to start, then the book is set up where you can circle around and just, spend 10 days circling around on each one. So a total of 30 days where you can just go one at a time and filling each one a tiny bit with a little something to do. And fundamentally, there's a tool in the beginning of the book, and it's actually made even easier by a sort of a tool that we have online that helps make it super easy, which I call a snapshot, which is basically, if you really can't figure it out, again, my goal was to make this so simple, and so that basically nobody has an excuse not to take action.
Yeah.
Then you do a really fast snapshot, which gives you really quick sense and understanding of which bucket you might want to focus on any given day. So you can almost make it like an automatic process.
Yeah, I love how experiential the book is, and I love how much you give people so many tools and resources, and it's so activity based. And there's a lot of things that come with the book online, like a built-in online community, and like you were saying, the tool to really take the pulse on where you are currently. Can you talk about some of those things that are available with the book?
Yeah, a book is an amazing vehicle to spread an idea. It's relatively short, it's sweet, it's inexpensive, it's available pretty much everywhere these days. So it's a great way to put an idea into somebody's hands, allow them to experience it, to play with it, to dance with it, and then share it. It's not a great tool to be able to provide a lot of assistance outside of that. So, one of the things that I talk about in the book is developing an awareness or a mindfulness practice. And then I actually lay out, I pretty much script what that practice would look like in the book. But as somebody who's had a long-standing practice myself, what I know is that especially when you're starting out, it can be so much easier if you start out in a guided way where you're just listening to somebody else's voice guide you through practice. So we can't really do that in the form of a book. So, what I did was I created, an example of a resource would be a guided, a simple, free, downloadable, guided mindfulness practice where somebody can drop it onto their smart device, and so they have it with them all the time. And then just take quick breaks and be able to do it in a guided way. So it was important to me that when I thought that there was something that could be created outside of the book that would really help people not just read the book, but do it and act on it and build it into a practice, a good life practice, I wanted to be able to provide those tools and those resources. And the other thing that you mentioned is a community. We've been building community. And in my businesses for actually, I guess it's decades now, whether they're brick and mortar businesses or online, community has always been such an important part. But I never really understood why or how important it was until the last few years when I started doing a lot of research on belonging and community. And what's so fascinating to me, and so you've lived in the yoga world also, and I know anyone who's listening to this, if you've been in a yoga practice or if you've been in any sort of faith-based place or congregation or church or whatever it may be, what you'll know is that there are really three important pieces. There's the teacher or the person who's leading the congregation, whoever that person is. There's the teachings, and then there's the community. And you need all three of those in order to really support the sustained action that leads to real growth. If you take away any one, then it just makes it harder. It doesn't mean it's not possible, but it makes it a lot harder. And what I've come to believe over the years is that community is super important. So we've been building community in everything that we do. We have a number of communities that we built for different programs that we run, and now, we're growing sort of, we've developed this amazing, really global community around Good Life Project and created a sort of an online home base for everybody to gather. And it's just a great place to share experiences and also find support, especially when you're looking to do things that will sometimes require a little bit of accountability or love or friendship or advice or wisdom along the way. I'm curious with what you're doing too, with the journaling practice. Do you feel like that's really more of a solitude-based practice, or do you feel like some people think there can be a community element to that?
That's a really great question. I think the piece that makes journaling is that it is a solitude practice. I think you can be so unfiltered and raw and vulnerable and real with yourself as kind of a first step. And then once you get to know yourself better and you develop that self-awareness that you might not even have with someone really safe like a therapist or a coach or a mentor, because there's that little bit of filtering that happens because you want them to like you, right? If you're like me, if you're a people-pleasing person. So I think doing that solitude practice of journaling makes it journaling and not, a blog post or something that you're writing and sharing. However, I think the more that you do that vulnerable journaling work on your own, then having a community is so crucial and so important, and also related in the way that you're able to be more vulnerable and more yourself and more of a contributor to that community in a really authentic way if you're able to know yourself more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it does. I'm sorry, I'm like asking you questions, but I'm curious
No, I love
about
it.
this now. Do you find that, because it's interesting, I'm a writer, and almost every writer that I know is also a journaler, and I'm not. It's just, for some reason, it's not been the thing that I've really gravitated to, even though I write in so many different ways. So I'm curious, do you find that when people are starting the practice of journaling, is there resistance to like that, to the early time where there's like a window where you kind of have to overcome the resistance and then it becomes a habit, or do people usually dive into it pretty easily?
Oh, no, 100% the first thing you said. That's actually why I wrote the book, was because, I started journaling as a fluke. It was, I talked about this in my riff actually, but, nobody told me to start journaling. I intuitively wandered in that section of the bookstore and spent time journaling, and then I felt relief. It was cathartic for me. And so when I started to be telling other people hey, do you want to try journaling? It was kind of weird, but it helped me, And then people were like, no, I'm not a writer. I wouldn't have anything to say, and really judging what came out. That's when I started to just give people questions. And that's essentially how my book came to be. It's 55 questions, essentially. And
Right.
and that, I think, having a good question, you'll get a good answer. And so now, I kind of use journaling as a jumping off point for taking the pulse on where I am and getting to know myself better. So I can, I actually bringing it back to your book a little bit, I think the exercise in your book about figuring out how full each of your buckets are and figuring out where you are, I think that would be a fantastic exercise for someone to journal with and to figure out, because how often do we really ask ourselves, how are you feeling? Or how are you feeling in this one specific bucket of your life? And sometimes you can just kind of think through it, and that's fine. And some people are mental processors. Some people are verbal processors. I'm kind of a verbal processor and a written processor. I think that's just kind of how I move through things. So I think in that sense, it can really be a companion to getting to know where you are in your life.
Yeah, I love that. I'm not sure where it'll be by the time this airs, but we've the book itself is traditionally published. At the same time, we've actually designed and are publishing through Good Life Project a companion practice journal for the book.
Cool.
And it's designed, so that then the idea is that the book itself is sort of introduces the idea. It really helps guide people in a much more in-depth way through the first month or so of exploring it. But just like journaling, the idea is we want these things to become a daily practice. So we created just a companion journal, a practice journal that sort of keeps giving you prompts every day. And I think it's kind of interesting because in a way, I think I've developed the practice of doing that myself. I just don't make journaling a part of it. But I keep saying I want to. So at some point, I may have to have you as my coach to help me get started.
Yes. I always say I'm not a journaling expert. I'm just a journaling cheerleader, and I'm the biggest cheerleader ever, an enthusiast of it. So
Awesome.
Definitely, you have a personal coach anytime.
Cool.
So circling back to your book, and then I have some other questions that aren't directly related to the book, but I want to know, or I want you to tell everyone else rather, because I already know because I read them, but there are some laws to the 3 buckets, and that part was really fascinating to me, and I think will really kind of drive home how simple this approach is and how impactful it is. So could you talk about, going back to the 3 buckets, the laws associated with them?
Yeah, so 3 simple buckets and 3 simple laws, and you can't violate them. They're like laws of nature, basically.
Like gravity.
Yeah, the first one is that the buckets all leak. So we like to think of these beautiful shiny buckets. Oh, I'm going to fill my vitality bucket, then it'll be full, and I'm done. And then I'll fill my connection bucket, and it's full, and I'm done. And then I'm going to fill my contribution bucket, and it's all topped off, and I'm totally done. And that would be awesome, except life doesn't work that way, and the buckets don't work that way. It turns out that everybody's buckets leak. And the further we get into life, the more they leak and the faster they leak. So the process of filling them is never actually done. You can top them off, and then you come back the next day and you'll find out, well, they've lost a little bit. They need a little bit more love. And it's the simple truth. It's the nature of the way that they work. So the idea is when you understand that, then you start to accept the fact that this is not a place where you arrive at a state where all of your buckets are full and you're good for life. The truth is you'll be constantly doing little things to keep filling them for life. And that's actually awesome because it gives you opportunities every day to keep exploring and keep learning and keep connecting and keep trying new things, knowing that, you've got not just an opportunity to do this, but you need it. Each one of your buckets needs it. So that's law number 1, is that all the buckets leak. Law number 2 is that your all of your buckets, the height of your all of your buckets, or the capacity of them, will always be capped by the least full bucket. And this is sometimes a little bit counterintuitive, but let me use an example to kind of make it real.
Okay.
Let's say you're working really, really, really hard. Like you have something big you want to accomplish. You're focusing on your contribution bucket. You want to bring your gifts to to just contribute to the world on a profound level, like create a huge legacy, make a big difference, a big company, a tremendous body of work, serve on a level that nobody else has served. So you're just working like crazy to fill that bucket. And you realize no matter how hard you work, it's getting like 60% full and then it just stops. So you're thinking, okay, I know the problem. The problem is I'm working hard, but somebody told me I need to work smart. That's the problem. I'm not working smart. It's like, okay, I'm gonna learn productivity and efficiency, and I'm gonna delegate and get systems and apps and stuff. I'm gonna work so much smarter, and that's gonna let me go that remaining 40% and just totally, have that contribution bucket brimming over. And then you do all that stuff, and maybe you get like 5 or 10% more full, but still, it's like there's this cap that you just can't. There's a ceiling you can't break through with it, and you can't work harder, you can't work smarter, and you can't figure out what else to do. And the truth is, for most people, this happens, and the reason is it has nothing to do with working harder or smarter. The problem is that for most people, they've devoted so much energy to filling that bucket that they've largely ignored the other two buckets, their connection bucket and their vitality bucket. Their relationships are falling apart, or at least they're a little bit estranged. Their health, their state of mind, their mindset, their mood is anywhere from not great to terrible. And the sometimes counterintuitive thing is that the way to actually unlock the capacity in your contribution bucket to be able to access your full potential and the way that you bring your gifts to the world, it's not to work harder or smarter. It's not to focus on that bucket. It's actually to go back and do some filling of your vitality bucket and of your connection buckets. Because as long as they're low, they will forever limit the capacity of the other ones. And what most people find is if they actually accept that, they'll be like, oh, so I'm going to go and just do some really simple things like sleeping better, eating better, setting aside time to be with somebody I love, and actually spend less time working, work less hard and sometimes even less smart. And all of a sudden the contribution bucket begins to unlock itself, and the wellspring of potential that they were just like fiercely trying to figure out how to unlock unlocks itself. And the reason isn't because they focused on it, it's because they focused on filling the things that they had ignored instead. So that's the second law. There's a third one.
Can I just ask you a quick? I just
totally.
have something to share before we get to the last law, because I definitely want to share that too. But that was such a great example, and I just wanted to, as you were saying that, I was thinking of another example that the law works sort of in reverse, and I was wondering if this is maybe something that you've heard of or you've seen with this law or not. But I talk to a lot of people, and because of my story, I talk with a lot of people who have struggled with orthorexia and have been so engrossed essentially in the vitality bucket, in the body bucket, and that it's kind of the same thing. What I tell people to always do is focus on your life as a whole and making your life your masterpiece, not your body. And, when that conversation kind of just shifting this example to reversing your example essentially of, focus on your contribution more, focus on your relationships and your connection bucket more, and not so much on the vitality bucket, and your vitality actually will improve, when you're not so focused on it. It's kind of like that old saying, a pot being watched or a bucket being focused on too much, will never boil or whatever. So
I love that. It's another great example.
Yeah, it's just kind of like a reverse of what you're saying, which just really proves the law. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you because I thought it was interesting.
Awesome. So the third law too.
Third law, yeah.
And the really simple one, and that's basically the buckets don't lie. We love to delude ourselves. We love to kind of pretend that certain things are happening that aren't happening. So we love to pretend, well, I don't actually, my connection bucket, it's actually okay. The fact that I haven't talked to any friends that I really care about in a while, the fact that I haven't spent any time with my partner, the fact that my family, isn't really seeing a whole lot of me, or when I'm there and completely not present, that's okay because, they're there for me. They're kind of dialed in. They're locked in, and they'll just go along for the ride. We love to delude ourselves. We do this with our health, with our vitality constantly. It's not so bad. It's actually pretty full. When the reality is, for very often, it's grinding down towards empty. And so the third law is just really simple. The buckets don't lie. It doesn't matter what you tell yourself. It doesn't matter the rosy picture you may paint. If a bucket's heading towards empty, it's heading towards empty, and it absolutely will grind you to a halt. No matter how much you tell yourself, that's not the reality. So in the end, you might as well just own that and be honest and say, it's time for me to do some work.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. I love this bucket approach so much. So another thing I'm curious about from your book, and I know this might be a challenging question to answer because people have asked me a lot about which tool was my favorite in the book, but I have to do it to you. Do you have a day? Because like we said, the book is broken up by these different days. Do you have a particular day or activity or part from the book that's just your favorite or really sticks out to you as one that, you really love or are excited to have people utilize in their life?
My easy default answer would be cultivating a mindfulness practice, but I'm not going to go with the easy default.
Okay.
So that, to me, that's my central practice. I mean, I have morning practices and stuff like that, but that's the center. But I'll do something a little bit different. And because not too long ago, we do an annual summer camp for adults where, this year nearly 400 people got on planes, trains, and automobiles from around the world to go and play and learn and live communally in a kids' sleepaway camp 90 minutes outside of New York City. And at the end of that, I actually read a chapter. As part of my closing talk to everybody, I read a chapter on stage. And that chapter was the chapter called, I'm blanking on the name of the chapter. It's my own book. It was a chapter entitled...
It's okay. That happens to me all the time.
I know. It's like I was saying, did that make it in or not? Dance like nobody's watching, because they're not.
Oh, yeah. That's definitely in there. I just read it.
Yeah, it's definitely in there. And the idea is that I was basically talking about the idea that it's really hard to be joyful when you're not yet you, when you don't just let go and just be you. But it's also, for so many people, it's really hard to just feel like nobody's watching and be themselves. And one of the things that I wrote about was sort of in a really embarrassing way. Back in a past life when I was a lawyer, when I was in law school, actually, before I would take every exam. And in law school, for most of your classes, your entire grade is based on how you do on a single day, on a single exam. So there's massive amounts of pressure. Man. I would close my door and I would crank up the music, and my embarrassing, loud dance jam was George Michael's Freedom 90. And I would just dance around my room like a complete geek, and just flailing about. But it made me feel so good. And it just kind of if you can, for a heartbeat, tap into that and let sort of that part of you be seen, even for a moment, it can be so powerful. So at the end of camp, when I'm reading this whole chapter and I shared that whole story, and then I got an amazing response to it. And during the whole camp, there was amazing stuff going on. And one night there was this giant dance party. But I realized that nobody had actually seen me dance at camp because I wasn't there. I'm kind of running around behind the scenes helping to run the whole show. So I invited everybody up on stage who was helping out. We had this amazing thing. And then at the last minute, we cranked up George Michael's Freedom 90 on the loudspeakers and just had this giant dance party. And I just jumped right into the middle of it with everybody else. And I think sometimes we just get so caught up in, how we're supposed to be and the facade of being serious. Yeah. And there's so much weight that we carry around when we do that, that it's the amount of energy it takes to prop up the mask of the person that we think everybody else wants us to be, that energy, if you let go of propping up the mask and you just devote it to being yourself, is so astonishingly freeing. And it's the thing that starts to let yourself be you, and that's the foundation to be joyful. And I found that, oddly enough, one of the ways to reverse engineer being a little bit more free is sort of somatically, is literally start just every day, turn off the lights, turn on your favorite jam, and for literally 3 minutes, like, I'm a 50-year-old, like, I'm a middle-aged dude from Manhattan, and I did this. And it felt awesome. So start with nobody watching, and then maybe invite some people in. And there's a weird thing that happens when we start to just get loose in our bodies and like let it move and reconnect with just free movement. It starts to trickle outwards, and we start to find ourselves being a little bit more free, a little bit more open, a little bit more us in other parts of our lives. At least that's been my experience. And I know, having built a yoga studio and taught yoga for a lot of years, I saw this happen on a daily basis so many times that I'm pretty solid on the concept.
Yeah. I think it's so important, especially for people, like, I'll speak for myself. I'm a very in my head person. I think a lot of thoughts, and getting in my body is really important because it's not my default, which sounds like counterintuitive, like it should be my default to be in my body, but I think so much, I'm so much intellectual in my head that it's so beneficial for me to let go in that way. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So I love that one. That's a great one.
Cool.
So I'm so curious about people's creative process, and especially with writing. So I would love if you could talk to us a little bit about your writing process and what creating this book in particular is like, and any, sort of tips on writing or putting a book out there, and how, you really made this one happen.
Yeah. Probably don't do it the way I made this one happen. It's generally not a good idea to go back to your publisher after you sold them a book and tell them that you want to write a different book. But for me, I think I shared earlier, I've had a really long-standing fascination with communities and belonging, and so I wanted to do a deep dive into that, and that's what the original exploration was. And I'll probably circle back to that at some point down the road. But I found that for various reasons, it actually wasn't the book that needed to be written at the time. So I went back to my publisher and said, hey, listen, there's this other book that I want to write called How to Live a Good Life, and this is really what it's about. And thankfully, they were awesome, and they were open, and they were like, yeah, that sounds awesome. We're totally on board. Do it. And I thought that was all good. And then I wrote the manuscript for it based on what I thought we were all on the same page with. And I handed in the manuscript, and they came back to me with comments and said, this isn't it. And I was like, oh, that had never happened to me as an author before. And so we had a conversation, and we talked it through, and we came up with a new direction. And I was pretty confident that, okay, now I get it. And I went off and I wrote a new manuscript. And, so months and months later, I hand it in, and I wait after that, and I finally get the word back again. And the word is, this isn't it either. And we're not sure what to say now. So I was like, wow, this is not what I expected, and this is not what I wanted to hear. And I, had a little bit of a coming to the writing gods moment about what I wanted to do with it, and realized that what I was needing to do was write a book that I hadn't written before, and in a very different genre, stepping away from business and entrepreneurship and careers and just owning this very different space. And I realized that the book needed to be written in a different way too. And I also realized that while I totally love geeking out on deep philosophical, nuanced explorations and a ton of science too, most people don't. I'm a little bit of a weirdo that way. So I really need to figure out how to convey strong ideas in a way that were just really easy to digest and engaging and fun and interesting, but also deeply valuable. And that meant that I needed to learn how to write a different kind of book. So, and I didn't know what that book was like or how it was structured. So I went and I read a ton of books in the genre and started to understand what it needed to be. And then ended up writing pretty much an entire third manuscript that was totally different. before I finally handed it in and had them say, yeah, this is it. This is awesome. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. That wasn't the chosen choice. But, you asked about the creative process or the writing process. One of the things that really got me through that was when it came time to write that third manuscript, and I had to really decide, do I actually want to do this a third time? Or do I just, am I just going to walk away? Part of the thing that kept me in it was the fact that, what, I'm a writer. I don't just write because it's a business tool. I don't just write because there's information that has to get out. I write because those happen to be wonderful benefits, but I also write because I love the craft of writing. Because when I'll read a sentence from a writer who I admire and start laughing out loud, not because it was funny, but because I can't believe how they crafted the words in a way that just made them sing. And I know it'll take me 10 more years to get to that place. And I'm okay with that. And because I love the craft. And for me, I decided that part of what I needed to do was create a new creative challenge and say, okay, I have a new set of constraints here. I need to learn a new approach to doing this. And so part of it was, okay, I need to write a new book, but also, can I rise to the challenge of learning essentially a new approach to my craft, a new genre, and a completely new way to write a book? And during the whole process, I kept finding myself drifting back into the old way, and I kept having to stop myself and say, no, that's not this book. That may be a future book, but that's not this book. And I kept having to kind of like pull myself back, and it took a while. But once I started to find my groove, what I realized is that it was actually a much easier book to write than the books that I've written in the past. Once I actually figured that newer process out.
Wow, that's really cool, and that's really inspiring to hear, especially for people thinking about your book, that there's so much thought and love and courage and hard work essentially that went into this book, being the third manuscript that you wrote. That's so amazing.
Yeah, I think it's funny. People, I think, was it Hemingway who said, like, writing is easy, just
yeah.
Open a vein and bleed onto the page.
Yeah.
Or something. I don't experience writing that way, but it definitely, there are moments where you're just in complete and utter flow, and it's this like state of grace.
Yeah.
That when you feel it, you don't want it to end, and you don't want to stop writing, and
Right.
It feels incredible, and very often you feel almost like the writing is just moving through you. Mm-hmm. You're more of a vessel than a creator. But for me, at least, those are not most of the moments that I write.
Yeah.
There's just really hard work that goes along with it, and a lot of correcting and changing and editing. I don't know, many of the greatest writers of our times, shared that it stayed that way for their entire lives. There wasn't a point where they just became so good and so proficient that it was just magical bliss all the time.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful and important for people to hear. Do you have more specific with your writing? Do you write in the morning? How did you, was it an all-day thing? Did you have writing days, and then you were still running your business at this time and doing your podcast and doing other things? So did you have specific days for writing or specific times of the day for writing? How did you handle that?
Yeah, I would generally write in the morning. I'm up before anybody in my house, so I get a couple hours early. So generally, especially if I'm under deadline, then I'll wake up in the morning, I'll do my morning practice, I'll grab something to eat and a cup of coffee, and then I'll go straight into my whatever is my sort of most highest demand creative work. And so when I'm on deadline for a book, it'll be that, because I know that I don't have unlimited bandwidth for that. I've got probably 2 to 3 hours in the morning, and then maybe another 2 to 3 hours in the afternoon or late evening. And and that's it. And plus, I have a life, I have a family, and I've multiple business things to dance between during the day.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm the same way, getting it in the morning because it might not happen the rest of the day, and I'm freshest in the morning, so
Yeah.
I love that you shared that. Okay, so I have some questions that they're more fun and not directly related to your book necessarily.
Cool.
And some of them are really quick and some of them are a little bit longer, but let's just start going through them. So,
Awesome.
What are you most curious about in your life right now?
Most curious about, man, this is hard because I'm curious about so many things.
You can name a couple if you want.
um, I'm curious about I'm curious about how we find belonging when so many of the sources of belonging for generations are dropping away.
What do you mean dropping away?
They're either people aren't relying on them anymore, or they're literally don't provide it anymore. So, for example, a huge source of belonging for many people is faith-based organizations, but there's the fastest growing class of people are what are called the nuns, which are people who are consider themselves spiritual but non-religious.
Yeah.
They're moving away from traditional faith-based organizations. So where do those people find the need for belonging satisfied? Big companies, employers used to provide a lot of that, a generation or two ago, and many don't anymore. Local trade organizations or leagues used to provide a lot of that, and a lot of those have vanished. So, and a lot of times, family provided that, but a lot of families are really they're not splitting up in terms of but they're just geographically
Right.
they don't stay together the way that they used to a few generations ago. So where do we find belonging is a pretty major curiosity for me, and also simplicity, I think, is becoming an increasing fascination for me. Not to the extent of sort of like extreme minimalism, but just how do we live more simply, and the power of simplicity to help us into experiencing a good life. So those are a couple things.
Those are great. Wow, the simplicity one is fantastic, and also really is something I'm curious about. But man, I really loved the examples that you gave. I never really thought about that, but I think that hunger for connection and community that we all have, I think, do you feel like the internet is something that's replacing those things? But I tend to feel like it is, yet it isn't, because it's not necessarily real. It's just virtual reality. What do you think about the internet's role in that?
I think the internet can be a great starting point for a lot of people. It's a great way to find people who may be like-minded and where you may really find a sense of belonging and community. But it's not the same as actually meeting or congregating on a regular basis, face to face in a room.
Yeah.
There's a lack of empathy that happens when you put a screen between two people or even a group of people that I haven't been able to. I'm not convinced that you can replicate. I think it can be great to find and start relationships. In my experience, it just doesn't touch the level of connection and then the ability to find belonging that happens when you bring those people together in person. I mean, that's to a large extent why, as much as we build programs and courses and stuff like that, and we have online communities, we do events, and we bring people together, either for small intensive weekends or for retreats or for, like big communal living events like camp. Because when you do that, it's profound. I mean, the depth of the connections and the relationships and that sense of, oh my God, I found my people.
Mm-hmm.
I have not found anything electronic that comes close to being able to experience that.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. That's so cool. So, okay, a couple more questions. What was the best part of your day so far today?
I could say this. best part
This
of
is one
my
of the
day.
highlights of my day, so
Awesome. I
I
mean,
always
it's
love talking to you.
yeah. I mean, it's this is an awesome part of my day. There's, you know, I'm gonna reject your question actually.
Okay.
I don't want to rank the parts of my day as being
Cool.
better than or worse than. I just feel like, my job is to be present in all parts of my
Yeah.
day, and to just kind of say like, there's even in the most challenging parts of my day, there's something awesome that will emerge from it. I may not see it now, I may not experience it as such in the moment, but I have faith that it will.
Ooh, that's the best answer to that question that I've ever gotten. So, good job. The other one that's kind of similar, I guess, but what are you most grateful for in your life right now? First
Mm,
thing
eh,
that comes to mind.
yeah, the answer is always pretty much the same. It's my family. It's my wife and daughter.
Amazing.
They're everything.
Okay, so something I've been thinking about a bunch lately, and I think I started to allude to this when we were chatting a little bit before we were recording, is something that I think is pretty common for people in their 20s where you're feeling, or I'll speak for myself, feeling a bit unfocused and kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none. And I was wondering, what advice do you have, or did you ever feel that way when you're trying different things and you have a lot of different ideas and figuring out where to focus? Do you have any advice or thoughts and feelings on focus?
Yeah, so I have a bit of a theory, and I'm probably a bit of a contrarian in a world where um, words like multi-potential and what are the other words that are sort of like
Multi-passionate?
multi-passionate? There's another one. I I do believe that there are many folks who genuinely just love being involved in pursuing many different things. At the same time, I have two concerns. One is I also have seen more than once people use that label as a way to hide from committing to one thing that they really want to be doing and not being able to be as adept at it as they hope and dream of being, and using that as an excuse to never step into a place where they actually see what they're capable of. And so I think it's really important to ask yourself the question, am I using this as a way to hide? Because I have seen many times that that's actually what's happening. It's not legitimate. It's actually a way to hide. And that kind of leans to the last part of it, which is that there's so much research that shows that we are happiest when we are aspiring towards something deeply challenging and deeply meaningful. And when we are reaching towards, on some level, mastery, or at least, high level of competence. And when you spread yourself sort of deliberately between five different things every day, all day, it's like, the classic story of trying to dig five wells simultaneously. They all stay pretty shallow for a really long time. None ever hits water. And it keeps you in a state of sort of like perpetual sustained discontent. And I sense that that can be really unfulfilling and ungratifying, and to a lot of people. So I look at what I'm doing these days, and I increasingly am yearning to really narrow my focus and spend a lot more energy doing a lot fewer things. And over the next few years, the process has already started to happen more for me. And over the next few years, it will happen even more.
Wow, and that was the thing that really will stick with me from this conversation. That just hit me really hard and was kind of just the like tough advice that I needed to hear. So thank you so much, and free podcast for everyone listening. That answer right there is enough value for this. So wow, yeah, that just really hit me hard. So thank you, man.
I hope in a good way.
yeah, no, a really good way, but kind of a way of like knowing that I need to focus more for my happiness, for the contribution that I'll make. And yeah, it just was really
Yeah,
impactful.
I mean, and it's like a lot of this has come to me because I've just in the space that we both operate, I think we are surrounded by a lot of folks who like to split their attention and who are persistently unhappy with the way that they're experiencing life. So, when I've had conversations with a lot of people about like the way that they love the fact that they're doing all these different things. And then if I ask them the question, how's that working out for you? Like, not from a place of judgment, but genuinely, how's that working out for you? And the answer is that they really don't feel like they're living life that's good, or that's anywhere near what they feel is their potential. Something's not right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm finding that I'm just curious if I was to focus 100% of my effort, or even 90, into one thing, rather than, giving 30, 40, 50, not even close to 50, like 30 or 40% to a bunch of different things, what my impact would be, or what my result would be, or how I could create at a higher level. And, some of that isn't really fixable with, how we were talking about before, of like making your living so you can do these other things, and having a family or other obligations. You have to kind of spread yourself a little bit, but focusing as much as possible, I think, is something that I'm really curious about exploring, and making steps in that direction seems like a really valuable thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I really get concerned that we've lost track of the grace of extraordinary competence, and the power that can bring to our experience of life, of really just narrowing and developing a skill set. And I do a lot of different things, and at the same time, I want to get to a place in my writing where I can be that person where somebody one day picks up a book of mine 10 years from now, reads a sentence, and is moved deeply and emotionally. Not so much even because of the content of the sentence, but because of the way that the sentence was crafted. I'm not there yet, and it's probably going to be a long time, but I want that. And that's going to make me keep working on it. and probably, giving up larger chunks of other things that I'm doing in the name of getting there.
Yeah, me too. I completely agree with that. And first of all, you're well on your way, because there were so many moments of that in your book, especially in the introduction and the way that you told that story. I kept thinking, wow, he's an amazing writer. I could see the entire situation with your mom and the example, and it was just really vivid and really well done. And I feel that way with podcasting, which kind of is my next somewhat selfish question that I wanted to ask you, which is, like I said before, you were a big inspiration for me starting this podcast, and you've been podcasting for years now. So that's something that I'm really curious about putting my focus in, and developing my craft more as an interviewer and a listener and a conversationalist and a curator of putting these conversations out. So what advice do you have about podcasting, and advice or tips you have from interviewing so many inspirational people and the product that you put out with your podcast?
Yeah, thank you. And that's almost, and it like surprised me at how much I've really come to enjoy podcasting too. And I think if you want to do an interview show, study the greatest interviewers that are out there, and really sort of look at how people have created amazing things before them. And also, I think something that tends to be forgotten is, when you're doing an interview format, is that as an interviewer, you still need to have a voice. And that doesn't mean that you need to sort of like dominate a conversation, but it means just the way that a writer has a voice. You need to have a perspective. You need to have a frame. You need to have something that you're leading towards and focused and building around. Like for me, I established really early on in podcasting, and so pretty early on, I remember seeing a comment on iTunes, and someone's like, really interesting guest, but I wish the host would just shut up and let them talk. And at first I was like, wow, like maybe they're right. Maybe, I'm breaking the rule of interviews. Then I realized that actually that's not that's not the show that I'm doing.
Yeah.
My show is not an interview show. It's intimate conversations about things that matter. And I use the word conversation very intentionally because I want to make it clear that this is not a straight Q&A show where one person asks a question, waits till the guest is done, and then they ask the next question. It's an actual conversation. And it can go back and forth. I've had times where, guests have completely flipped the conversation on me and just started asking me stuff. And that creates a dynamic where, people will either opt in for that. If you're like rooted in traditional TV interview and that's what you want to see and listen to, you're probably not going to like the show. And that's okay. You're not my person. If you're, if you're open to something which is just more genuine and conversational and you feel like you're a fly on a wall in a conversation between two friends, then that's sort of like the tone. So I think it's really important to understand, what's the format and what's the tone and what's the voice that you're building around, and then go and find people who are the best in the world at that and deconstruct what they've done and how they've done it.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you so much for that advice. And hopefully in the past, since 2014 when you first came on the show, that's the goal. That's what I'm aiming for. And I think practice is another really big thing.
Totally.
After doing more than 100 of these now.
And I'm really glad you brought it up, because between now and the first time we jammed, I mean, I've seen you grow as a podcaster, as a host, as somebody. I mean, your craft has just become really noticeably better. Not that you were bad in the beginning. I'm not in no way slamming you being, but just to say that, it is really cool to, we haven't actually sat down and done this for a couple of years now. So I have enough space between me, whereas sometimes when you're on the inside looking out, you really can't see it in short windows, where I can kind of look back and say, wow, this has actually been a really different experience. And I can see how much you put into developing your craft as a podcaster.
Thank you so much. What a lovely compliment. Thank you so much. That means a ton to me. So, all right, before I finally let you go, I just have a few really fun questions to ask that are much shorter. So, what is the best thing you've eaten in the last week? First thing that comes to mind.
Dark chocolate with almonds.
Yum. What is your favorite part of living in New York City and your least favorite part of living in New York City? Did you grow up in New York City? Are you from there?
Yeah, I grew up just outside of the city, and I've been in the city for, 30 years now or something like that.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you're definitely qualified to answer this question.
Yeah. The best part is you can get anything you want anytime, day or night. It is the most convenient, well-resourced place on the planet, and they're really interesting, quirky people. It's probably the most interesting place on the planet. And there's literally, the city does not ever shut down. That's also the most challenging thing about the city for me, is that it does never stop. There's a level of energy and freneticism and sort of people that are constantly moving fast and amped that eventually starts to wear on you. So the fact that Central Park exists 3 blocks from me on one side and the Hudson River exists 2 blocks on the other side is the thing that allows me to be okay in the city, because it lets me step out and kind of like step back into nature and touch stone and just sort of dial it back a little bit.
Yeah, nice. What's your favorite city that you'd live in if you didn't live in New York City, or favorite city outside of New York?
Yeah, I couldn't say that I would live in it, but some favorite. I love Boulder, Colorado. I love Portland, love San Francisco. And although I haven't been in a really long time now, Sydney, Australia is pretty cool. Melbourne's a pretty cool city as well.
Cool. All places that I want to go. What are the best and worst parts of entrepreneurship?
The hardest part for me, at least, is dealing with sustained high-level uncertainty about whether what you're doing is going to work. And the best part is when it does.
Very cool. Love that. So you're having a dinner party and you can invite about 3 to 5 people. Who do you invite and what do you hope that they turn and ask you, and what do you hope that isn't brought up that you just don't really want to talk about anymore, and what do you guys eat?
Is this like an alive or dead question, or people have to
Yes,
be alive?
anybody.
Okay. um, I'm gonna invite my family because I love hanging out with them. Um, the Buddha,
Nice.
Bono. Um, who else? Somebody in the art world, probably. Janis Joplin. And probably both Elizabeth Gilbert and Brene Brown.
Nice. I totally want to come to that dinner party.
Yeah, and as for what's on the menu,
Yeah.
any damn thing we want. On the menu, it would be, I don't know, a blend of just all sorts of delectable things.
You can have a buffet.
A buffet?
Yeah. You can have all of the things.
All right. Assuming that, like, there are no health or dietary restrictions, I'm going with lots of pasta.
Nice.
Yeah, some kind of fresh, yummy vegetables, and then chocolate.
Dark chocolate with almonds.
Yeah, that'll do. We can actually probably replace all the food with that, and I'd actually be equally okay.
Yeah. What do you hope that that group would talk about at the party?
I don't think the topic's really going to matter. I think you just get that group of people who are so genuinely interested and open, and it's more just about the truth and the openness and the joy and the space that gets created.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so this question, last kind of fun question, it's really to just get you to recommend a couple things. So you're trapped on a deserted island and you can only bring with you one book, one movie, one song, and one podcast to listen to. What would you bring with you?
Okay, so the book's going to be Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning or Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You'll Go.
Nice.
Yeah, 2 favorites of mine. Wait, what were the other options?
Movie.
Okay, movie.
Anything that you want to recommend that you could.
I'm trying to think. Let's go back to that.
Okay. Song.
Song would probably be something Bruce Springsteen, probably like Thunder Road or Jungle Land from Springsteen.
Nice. And what about podcast? Any other podcasts that you listen to that you really like that you want to recommend to people that you could listen to on your island?
Yeah, Krista Tippett, On Being, love.
so
She
good.
was one of my big inspirations. Somebody who I'm just amazed at.
Yeah.
And
Very cool.
This American Life, I dig also.
Yeah. Every week it's like I see the topic and I'm like, how's he going to make this interesting? And he always does, right?
Yeah, you know what I love about it also? There's so much mythology around the podcasting world right now. Like, go and find the highest profile guest that you can find for your show, and because that's what's going to do things. And then This American Life just completely obliterates that entire concept because you don't ever know anybody who's on This American Life. They're just all everyday, ordinary people who are going through really human stories, and yet is the most, intensive, obsessive thing that you don't want to miss.
Yeah, and the production quality.
So good.
Yeah. Have you been listening to the New York Times Modern Love column has a podcast now?
Yeah, I caught one of them, but I haven't had a chance to listen to any others.
It's so good. I'm so into it. I feel like you'd really like it. It's great storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to circle back to movie? Did anything pop into your mind? A movie that you really love or that you saw recently that you want to recommend? Anything there?
I'm sure there is. I'm just blanking on it.
That's okay. Well, if you think of something while we're still talking or in the future, let me know. I'll let people know.
Got it.
All right. So you ask on your podcast what living a good life means to you, and you've gotten some amazing answers over the years for that. And last time that you were on the show, my show was actually called something different, Wellness Wonderland, and now, or the Wellness Wonderland Radio, but now it's called the same name as my book, Let It Out with Me. And I want to know, Jonathan, from you, what do you still want to let out? Is there anything that you literally still want to let out on this podcast, or just in life in general that still wants to come out of you?
My artist, my inner artist, and it comes out, but I want to let it out more. And actually, it's in the process of coming out more, almost as we speak.
Amazing. That's so great, and I'm so excited for everything that your inner artist creates, including this book, so everybody will know where to find it, obviously in the show notes. I love it. It gets a star of approval from me, and I'm so grateful to you for being a mentor and a friend and coming on the show round 2, and I know we'll be connected for life, so thank you again, and I hope you had fun doing the podcast again.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you. All right, that was my conversation with Jonathan Fields, take 2. If you want to listen back to my first podcast episode with him, that is in the show notes. If you just need more Jonathan, that's one place to go. And then also check out his book. I really do love it. It's fantastic. Check it out for sure. And of course, his podcast, which we mentioned as well. So tweet at him, tweet at me to let us know what you think of this episode. If you have any questions, we will get back to you. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Love you. Bye.